This one ended up being surprisingly long, just in my research alone, but there's a lot of talk about economic systems and alternative economics and how the current system has failed. And like every aspect of what we're doing, that has to be taken into consideration and looked at and carefully considered if we are to make accurate and viable approaches for systemically sustainable human growth and development. There are many organizations that have discussed the benefits of circular economics, resource-based economics, and other alternative economic systems, which will be introduced briefly in part 2 of this video series. But perhaps not surprisingly, those that have survived have done so under the current economic system, largely foregoing anything but the occasional discussion about alternative economic systems. Those that were more insistent on actually implementing alternative economic systems have all mysteriously vanished somehow. Before beginning a dive into the alternative economic systems, it's important to understand some of the subtle and not so subtle aspects of the modern socioeconomic system that we live in and which we all rely upon for our survival. The origins of the modern banking system, fractional reserve banking, and central banks such as the Federal Reserve System are complex and have evolved over the course of centuries. The modern banking system can trace its roots back to medieval and Renaissance Europe. Early banking activities were conducted by merchants and goldsmiths who began offering loans and holding deposits. The Knights Templar and Italian city-states like Florence, Venice, and Genoa played significant roles in the early development of banking. In the 15th and 16th centuries, banking families like the Medici family in Italy and the Fuggers in Germany became more influential. They developed more sophisticated banking practices, including the issuance of bills of exchange, which facilitated trade across Europe. The founding of the Bank of Amsterdam in 1609 and the Bank of England in 1694, about the same time that Miguel Cervantes wrote about the ingenious but staid gentleman Don Quixote, was a period of significant changes, paving the way for the modern economic system. These institutions began to formalize banking practices, including the issuance of banknotes and the concept of a central bank and what we would come to know as fractional reserve banking. Fractional banking is a system where banks hold only a fraction of their depositors' funds in reserve, lending out the remainder. In the 17th century, English goldsmiths issued receipts for gold deposits, which could be used as money. They realized they could lend out a portion of these deposits while keeping enough in reserve to meet withdrawal demands. As banking evolved, banks began to adopt similar practices, lending out most of their deposits to earn interest while keeping a fraction in reserve. This system allowed banks to create money through the lending process and the creation of debt as well, as loans would be deposited and relent multiple times. Thus, the paperwork as presented by the World Bank, where if I loan you $100 and you agree to pay back $110, we've created $10 in wealth through the introduction of a debt. That's a gross oversimplification, but it remains true. Central banks are national institutions designed to manage a country's currency, money supply, and interest rates. The Federal Reserve System is, of course, the central bank of the United States. The Bank of England, established in 1694, is one of the earliest examples of a central bank. It was created to manage government debt and stabilize the currency. Other countries soon followed with the creation of their own central banks. By the 19th century, most European countries had established central banks to stabilize their financial systems and support economic growth. The United States established the Federal Reserve System in 1913. The Federal Reserve Act created what is ostensibly, at least, a decentralized central bank with 12 regional Federal Reserve banks. Its stated goals include providing a safer, more flexible, and more stable monetary and financial system. Have you filled up your gas tank recently? Have you bought groceries? Have you tried to finance anything? The modern economic system has accomplished many things, but it has done nothing to stabilize the economy or to alleviate or avoid any economic disasters, obviously. In short, the current socioeconomic system, relying as it does on constant circulation, if not growth, has failed in virtually every stated goal, save perhaps making the rich even richer while preventing many of us from actually owning anything. And sorry, but if you have no allodial title, and you are forced to pay fees each and every year for property you already purchased and supposedly own, or you risk forfeiting that property, you don't own that property. Be it your land, your home, your vehicle, or anything else which only provides you with a certificate of title. A certificate, in the legal sense of the word, is only a declaration that something, a title in this case, exists, though you are not given the actual title or the allodial title to anything that you own. And I hate to even think about bringing up Marx in this conversation, as the vast majority of his supporters and critics alike have never even read any of his work, never mind taking the time to actually delve into the deeper underpinnings and the reasons he considered writing it in the first place. In some ways, in many ways, in direct contradistinction to the original principles of communal socialism as were originally established by his mentor, Charles Fourier, who established the original principles during the course of his life from 1772 to 1837, making Marx only 19 at the time of the death of Fourier. As I have noted many times, and as may be clearly evidenced from the vast array of resources I have introduced in my work, I still believe it is imperative to have a deep understanding of literally every facet before any final determinations can be made. I will say up front that I strongly disagree with the racist beliefs held by Marx. I will also reluctantly admit that there are occasions in Das Kapital where his economic theories, in contrast to capitalism, when separated completely from the political diatribe that is there, where I do agree to a limited extent, though I will clarify that, and no, I am not a communist, and remain an unabashed capitalist in the confines of the current socioeconomic and sociopolitical systems that we have to live in. Marx may have well been a favorite of Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, and the father of modern propaganda and social engineering. The observations Marx made about the class struggles, the vast chasms between the wealthy and the poor, and the ability of dictatorial despots determined to distract the downtrodden with diatribes describing delusions of some distant dystopian utopia should never be ignored or casually dismissed. The class struggle has and will always continue to be a very powerful political tool, and one which can and is easily abused by the unscrupulous and power-hungry, and continues to be used in the modern age to create further divisions between an otherwise united peoples. Given its basis in economic theories, this is still very relevant to what we are working on, and an important part of understanding what drives human nature, and thus very relevant to what we are doing, despite the distaste one may experience when conducting such studies. It would not be a major stretch to presume that, in fact, the current socioeconomic system was originally put into place in order to retain the real or tangible wealth at the top, while allowing us commoners to live within a debt-based economic system that provides no real financial relief and allows for very limited financial gains for the average Joe. In part 2 of this video series, I'll look at and perhaps even consider some of the more viable alternative economic systems as opposed to sociopolitical economic systems such as capitalism or communism. While the difference may be subtle and nuanced, it is imperative to understand for the successful introduction of systemically sustainable human growth and development. So, again, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, we'd love to hear from you, and keep an eye out for part 2 and even part 3 of this video series, as they will both contain relevant information about how and why we are doing what we are doing. So, let us know. Thank you. Bye. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment below.